here. I think all of us are very frustrated with this administration, with the previous administrator and the EPA in general, the budget cuts, the lack of investment in science, the consolidation of departments we don't think should be consolidated. There's a long list, and many of my colleagues have already mentioned them. And overall, they seem to be constantly pointing to a lack of regard for the challenges we're facing with climate change. You had mentioned early on that, in your opinion, economic growth and environmental protection can go hand in hand, and we've given that a lot of thought in my state, the state of Maine, where we're very dependent on having a healthy environment, and there are high levels of concerns from my constituents, and I believe people across the country. But we're seeing it in our everyday lives. Sea level is rising. Our state is, framed by the ocean, and the ocean in the Gulf of Maine is warming at a rate 95% or more faster than the rest of the world. And those temperatures have a huge impact on our fisheries. Ocean acidification, as my colleague Mr. Kilmer from the West Coast mentioned, is already having an impact. And these are big picture issues. These aren't things that, one little program can correct. And it seems like that's where the EPA has the most disregard for the challenges that we're facing in the future. There's not a simple way to cool down the ocean if we don't have regard for the polar ice cap melting, and there's not a simple way to deal with ocean acidification if we're not looking at these big picture issues. And with an administration that's pulled out of the Paris Accord and seems to have total disregard for even this topic, you yourself said it's not an existential threat. I don't really always understand what existential means, but if this isn't an existential threat, I don't know what is. So I want to go back to a couple of more specific points, but just express my frustration and real anger at the lack of regard in the administration and in this budget. We talked a little bit earlier about vehicle standards, and that is one of those places where I can't begin to understand the justification for rolling back the previous standards and going back on what the last administration did. Your own administration says that it will cost about 60,000 jobs, lead to 7 billion tons of pollution at a time when we are really trying to deal with this issue. The way I look at it in my state, it's a very rural state, maybe one of the most in the country. People drive pickup trucks and bigger cars, and in fact, they're just going to have to buy a lot more gas. The Rhodium Group did a study that shows that if we stick with the standards that are today and don't continue on this process, over time it's going to cost consumers $193 to $236 billion. That's just real money out of people's pockets, and it appears to be done for the benefit of oil refiners. There was reported in the New York Times last December that a real push had been made by Marathon Petroleum, as well as a conservative think tank, the Koch brothers, saying that these standards were a relic of a disproved narrative of resource scarcity. Well, I think there's general understanding that we have to reduce our dependence on oil and gas in this country. And while we may have somewhat of a boom going on right now, there are multiple reasons, including the quality of our air, that we should be moving ahead. Most scientists believe there's no way to decarbonize without taming these carbon emissions. And we're missing out on the technology when we don't have our auto companies moving forward with this, where everybody else in the world is with hybrid and electric vehicles. So I've actually taken up a lot of my time on my own diatribe here. But can you give me any justification why this is a good idea and why it benefits anybody but oil refiners or people selling these products? Why do we want to fall so far behind?
Thank you, Congresswoman. First of all, and I think the point you made about what people in Maine like to drive is part of the issue here. The mid-evaluation, the mid-course evaluation that the Obama administration undertook, they started it in November 2016, right after the election. They went out for public comment and finished it by January 20th. They did not review a lot of the data that we've been reviewing over the last 2 years as we move forward with our CAFE proposal. One of the interesting facts that we've found is that the average age of cars on the road today has increased from, it used to be average of 8, now to 12 years. People are holding on to their cars longer because of the expense of the cars. We believe our proposal will reduce the price of a new car by $2,300. It will also
Let me just interrupt here, though, but
1,000
aren't you,
lives.
I understand in the short run, but the more competition there is on fuel-efficient vehicles, the more we improve the technology, the more we have hybrid, I mean, we're going to pretty soon have an electric truck. We're going to have an electric SUV. We're going to be much smarter about all this stuff. But in the end, if you keep people in non-fuel efficient cars, they're going to pay a lot more in gas. So maybe you're right, in the short run, it's going to cost you a little bit less, but aren't you in the long run of the vehicle going to pay a lot more money in fuel?
But remember, the standards are a floor, they're not a ceiling. We encourage the automobile industry to go as far as
I
they
think
can.
we all know that
to come out with-
voluntary standards aren't going to help our country keep up with the rest
Our
of the world.
standards wouldn't be voluntary, they'd be the floor. But a lot of the car companies say that they can go further, but it depends on what the American consumer buys as well. But, we're looking not just at fuel efficiency with our standard. The Obama administration's proposal only looked at fuel efficiency or CO2. We're looking at both fuel efficiency as well as lives saved.
I'm out of time, and I'm dangerously out of time. But my other question is, it appears that there wasn't a lot of consulting with the states. A lot of states want to reduce these standards, whether you do or not. Could you provide our committee with the records of the EPA and the NHTSA's meetings on your consultations with the states? Because I feel there wasn't enough done.
Certainly, we can provide that. I'll tell you, I personally met with Mary Nichols from California 3 times.
I have to yield back. Sorry. Thank you for your answer.